Good afternoon, dear members, industry colleagues, and respected speakers. A hearty welcome to all of you to today's session on COVID-19 pandemic, growth imperatives for the Indian economy and the automotive sector, being organized by the German Engineering Federation, VDMA, with our knowledge partner, CRISIL Limited. We hope all of you and your family and colleagues are safe and doing well. I am Jamli John, and I'm based out of the Mumbai office of VDMA, and I'll be taking you through the session today. Before we continue, I'd like to remind all of you that you can continue to post your questions during the session, and the questions will be answered during the last leg of the webinar during the Q&A. Next slide. VDMA is committed to India. VDMA, the Mechanical Engineering Industry Association, was founded in November 1892 and is the most important voice for the mechanical engineering industry. VDMA represents around 3,300 mostly medium-sized companies, making it the largest industry association in Europe, with its members contributing 78% as exports, amounting to 232 billion euro production. Recognizing the very early significance of India as a future market for the member companies, India was the first overseas office amongst the BRIC countries. VDMA is the only German industrial association having well-established offices in India since several years, with our offices located in Noida, Kolkata, Mumbai, and Bangalore. Next slide. For today's session, we'll have a short address from Mr. Rajesh Nath, the Managing Director of VDMA India, Dr. Dharmakirti Joshi, the Chief Economist at CRISIL Limited, who will give us an overview on the economic review and impact of the stimulus package, Mr. Ajay Srinivasan, Director, and Mr. Hemal N. Thakkar, who is the Associate Director at CRISIL Research, shall share their expertise on the automotive sector and the new challenges in the supply chain management. Thank you, speakers. Next slide. Mr. Nath has been a synonym and a face for VDMA for almost 20 years now. With more than 3 decades of experience working in various industries, both in Germany and India, he's also been accorded the Cross of the Order of Merit, which is the highest civilian order from the German president for promoting Indo-German trade. With no further delay, I'd like to hand it over to you, Mr. Nath. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jamli. Good afternoon, members and friends from the Indo-German fraternity. A hearty welcome to all of you at the web seminar on COVID-19 pandemic, growth imperatives for the Indian economy and automotive sector, being organized by the German Engineering Federation, VDMA, along with our reputed partner today, CRISIL. I extend a warm welcome to Dr. Dharmakirti Joshi, Chief Economist, CRISIL Limited, and his colleagues, Mr. Ajay Srinivasan, Director, and Mr. Hemal Thakkar, Associate Director at CRISIL Research. We feel privileged to have Dr. Joshi amongst us. So Dr. Joshi, thank you for joining us today. Friends, as we all know, the last 4 months have been truly unprecedented. COVID-19 has spread to 213 countries, and more than 16 million people globally have been infected with coronavirus. COVID-19 is being compared to the Great Depression of 1930s. Even though there are competing ideologically motivated explanations for the Great Depression of the 1930s, there is a consensus that the abandonment of gold standard, financial deregulation, and inadequate monetary policy by the US Federal Reserve paved the way for the Wall Street crash of 1929. On the other hand, the current economic contraction is solely due to the fear of the COVID-19 pandemic, which forced many governments around the globe to shut down their economies in varying ways, and hence the supply and demand side have been badly impacted globally. In India, localized shutdowns on account of COVID-19 outbreaks have prompted further lowering of the GDP estimates. In fact, Dr. Joshi, CRISIL in a document -5 has predicted a 5% contraction in GDP in the current year. However, against the initial 5% shrinkage estimate, citing a setback to the recovery seen in June due to the mini lockdowns, some of the rating agencies are now predicting a contraction of around 8% to 9%. However, 2 top finance ministry officials last week dismissed forecasts of a sharp contraction in GDP in the current fiscal, mentioning that June and July have been more promising than initially anticipated. They felt that if the trend continues in this manner and we are not saddled with any more surprises, it may not be as bad as anticipated. Direct and indirect tax collections in the June quarter were encouraging, and the daily e-way bill data was also showing a positive trend. Hence the question arises, friends, will India's economy spring back to normal sooner than expected? And is a sharp recovery in the next financial year possible? Now, what could be the reasons for this optimism? One, there is a huge pent-up demand for both staples and discretionary products. Thanks to COVID-19 lockdown and movement restrictions, demand temporarily shifted to staples, which tended to be immediately important. That is why, even in the first quarter, Hindustan Lever, for example, reported only a 7% decline in volumes, whereas Britannia has reported bumper good profits. Friends, the rural sector, relatively unaffected by COVID-19 and additionally impacted by the return migration of workers from urban area, is expected to see a spike in demand. Both agriculture and government spends are rising in tandem, providing temporary jobs to those who want them. A good start in the monsoon has raised sowing, holding promise of a bumper crop. Plus, the government has announced several key reform measures for the agricultural sectors, which have improved sentiments across the entire agriculture supply chain. A manifestation of the upbeat mood in rural India is a revival in the demand for tractors and the prime mover of the rural India, the good old motorbikes. In urban areas, the Kirana stores and e-commerce companies have not done too badly, and the latter are in fact in robust expansion mode. Both Amazon and Flipkart are boosting warehousing spaces. The former is creating 10 new fulfillment centers in different cities and adding around 50,000 temporary jobs. Other logistic and delivery companies are also in a mood to expand. With the lockdown mania ending in most states, despite the rise in COVID cases, clearly all the state governments and center are thinking growth. This means the recession could be confined to the first two quarters, and growth should become positive by the fourth quarter. In fact, positive growth in the third quarter, October to December, could be a possibility based on probability of a well-timed stimulus around October or at least by November, December. Secondly, the revival in demand, even if temporary, should be possible because the lockdown period has seen a huge spike in savings. This savings spike will aid consumer demand as long as there is no further damage to the consumer confidence. As at the beginning of July, aggregate deposits in the banking systems were up 11% year on year, while credit growth has been lower at 6.1%. The savings rate could rise further as the most solvent corporates raise money from the capital market and bring down the aggregate bank debt. A good example here is Reliance, which raised a massive 2.1 lakh crores in 3 months, cutting the debt dramatically. Thirdly, never before have states been as keen on reforms as now. The reason is not far to seek. In the past, states were happy to blame the center for any problems. However, now with the COVID-19, states have seen a much dramatic drop in revenues that they are no longer willing to leave it all to the center. States like Karnataka, UP and Madhya Pradesh are reforming labor, land and farm sector laws one by one. If the center additionally implements an easier labor code, amends the land acquisition laws invites foreign capital with cheap land banks and production incentives, partially already happening in the mobile phones and pharma intermediates, and privatizes some companies this year, we are essentially laying the groundwork for a manufacturing upswing from the next fiscal year, for which investment should start to flow from the last quarter onwards. In this scenario, the government is reportedly watching the impact of the earlier stimulus before taking a decision on a fresh one. Hence, prompt informed action based on proper economic insight into the whole matter can save the day. I would like to conclude referring to one of the most endearing episodes of Mahabharata, in which Abhimanyu wages a heroic battle to break the Chakravyuh. While we celebrate this valor, we mostly ignore a fundamental lesson of this story. The lesson is, do not enter a Chakravyuh if you don't know how to exit from it. We are facing a similar situation. We have imposed the hardest nationwide lockdown in the world and are now struggling to reopen the country and the economy. We are certainly looking forward to the views of Dr. Joshi on economic review and impact of the stimulus package, followed by presentation from Ajay and Hemal on automotive sector and new challenges in the supply chain management. Thank you once again to CRISIL for joining us and partnering us for this web seminar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Nath, for the kind address. We'd now like to welcome Dr. Dharmkirti Joshi, the Chief Economist at CRISIL Limited. He leads the economic research agenda and is the primary spokesperson for CRISIL on macroeconomic issues. He has an extensive experience in macroeconomic analysis and medium-term assessments of the Indian economy. He was a member of the working group of savings for the 12th five-year plan. He's also the member of the industry monitoring group for the Reserve Bank of India. He's a member of the economic policy group of Confederation of Indian Industry and the Indian Merchant Chamber. Dr. Joshi has spent 30 years in economic research and consultancy. He spent 11 years at the National Council for Applied Economic Research, NCAER, before moving on to the Central Electricity Regulatory Commission, CERC, New Delhi, and then CRISIL. We are honored to have you, Dr. Joshi, today amongst us, and will request you to kindly share your insights.
Thank you very much for that generous introduction. Can we move to the first slide, please? Yeah, I wanted to make a couple of headline points before I launch into the India outlook. I think one thing that we have certainly learned from what's going on with COVID-19 is that we still know very little about it. I think so. We are in a uncharted territory, so to say. And what's very clear from experience in other countries is that, and also here, is that virus will define the path of the economy. I think if you manage to bring it under control, I think the economy can be revived. If it continues to remain a nagging issue, I think the full-scale recovery cannot take place. Second point I wanted to make was that this is a non-linear event. This is a non-linear event, and there is a huge amount of uncertainty when it will peak. So that makes it very difficult to quantify the economic outcome. Just to give you an example, a few weeks back, it was believed that the COVID-19 might peak out in the month of May, June, but now I think even July has passed, so people are talking about the latter part of July-September quarter. So that's what I meant by difficulty in predicting the outcome. And second, I think because we do not have any medicine for this, so the lockdown is the only medicine available, and social distancing is and lockdowns. So what these do to the economy is what we are learning now. I mean, because this lockdowns bring the economy to a sudden stop, and when you keep extending the lockdown, the impact on the economy increases disproportionately. So to give you an example, a 2-month lockdown is more than 2 times as harmful as the 1-month lockdown, because the buffers keep eroding as you get deeper into the lockdown. And similarly, when you open the economy up, partially, I think you cannot realize full synergies between all parts of the economy, so you end up with a suboptimal output. The third thing I wanted to point out was that past pandemics have increased the desire to save, I think, as Mr. Nath was also pointing out. And this time also we are seeing people are concerned about their future, so the tendency is more to save than to tend to consume. And finally, I think the lesson from across the world in the last 3 to 4 months is that no matter what you do with policy, you cannot offset the damage that is coming from COVID-19. You can only minimize it. The global recession is guaranteed. And what we also know is that the transition to a normal situation is not going to be a simple affair. It's going to be a pretty complicated affair, and part of it we are already witnessing. Can we move to the next slide, please? Yeah, I think on the global front, this is S&P Global's call for India, which is, I think, which was made in sometime in the early part of June and is due for revision. So overall, I think the world economy is expected to contract by 3.8%. The US by -5%, Eurozone by close to 7%. And India by -5%. I think India is getting hit much harder than most Asian economies. And also, I think, unlike the global financial crisis, when India was still growing about 300 basis points above the global average, this time around, India is growing at a slower pace than the global growth. So clearly, hit to India has been quite hard, and we'll dwell into that. The outlook for the global economy and for India is also has risks which are tilted to downside. For India specifically, I think we always have a monsoon risk, but fortunately this time it's playing out well. One should also remember that the financial sector has been pretty fragile in India even before the crisis, and that continues to pose a risk to recovery. And also, I think it can be a source of another risk. And the lack of fiscal support can make the recovery process a little slower than what it should have been. Next slide, please. Yeah, I think I won't spend much time on this. This is all historical information. But whenever we talk about COVID-19, we always talk of immunity. I mean, you need strong immunity to face it. And if you look at the Indian economy just before the crisis, I think most of the economic parameters were at a 10-year low, whether it is growth or it is private consumption or business confidence, or it is the health of the financial sector. So clearly, I think things were not, we had very weak initial conditions. So what COVID-19 did was it amplified the initial weaknesses in the system. And on top of that, it also added the fear of life, and I think it created misery around the health. So and eventually, I think lockdowns meant that livelihoods get impacted. So clearly, it has magnified whatever weakness was there in the economy and added new dimension of health to it. So with that, let me go to the next slide, please. Yeah, I think before we know what our forecast is and why we are forecasting -5%, we need to know why India did what it did in terms of addressing the COVID-19 crisis. There are three imperatives we believe which shaped India's response. One is India is a very highly densely populated country. So what it means is that virus will spread faster. Second is we have weak health infrastructure. We are ranked about 145 in the world. And it's very obvious that we cannot take the medical overload if the virus indeed spins out of control. And the third imperative before us was that we have limited fiscal space, which means government's fiscal accounts are already stretched and they do not have the bandwidth to spend more. Now we began with lockdown because of the first two concerns, and then later on we realized, I think within a month, that the livelihoods are getting impacted. And the more you get into a lockdown, the more government will have to spend to support the economy. And if you do not have the resources, there is very little option but to open up. So we opened up the economy when the virus is still continuing to continuing on its exponential path, so to say. And the economic package that India announced has obviously some part of the monetary policy, which is, I think, the central bank is pushing liquidity, cutting rates, but the problems in the financial sector mean that whatever signals RBI gives, the banks cannot fully transmit it into the system. Banks would have a dilemma today whether to lend more and in this environment and add to the pile of NPAs, or not support the economy. So I think it's a difficult situation. And fiscal component, because of our fiscal situation, which is stretched, the government's fiscal stimulus is quite weak compared to what other economies have done and what we require. And finally, I think the positive side of our economic package is that very few countries have tried to initiate economic reforms during such period. I think there are initial good noises on agriculture and mining. I hope it percolates down to manufacturing related reforms as well. I think this is reforms are, I mean, you bite the bullet now and you reap the benefits later on. So clearly economic reforms have a payoff over the medium run. They can improve your growth potential, etc. In the short run, I don't think they do anything to push the economy up. I think the support to the economy can come largely from fiscal and monetary policy. And coming to, I think, I just wanted to give a historical context to the 10% permanent loss of GDP that we are talking about. So let me give you an example from the global financial crisis, which is the first chart. So what I've done is on the y-axis, we have the real GDP of the economy indexed to 100 for the ease of understanding. And the black line that you see is the trend path of GDP. So had there been no global financial crisis in 2008, for instance, GDP would have followed the black line. But since that didn't happen, growth fell. So the red line is showing the actual path of GDP. But what you notice is that after falling, the economy actually grew much faster, and it made up for all the GDP that it had lost in 2008-9. This time around, I think that doesn't seem to be happening, and that's unlikely to happen in our view for several reasons. I mean, one, I think the hit to the economy is very large. If there were no pandemic, the economy would have grown at least 5%. Because of the pandemic, it's growing at -5%. So you are 10% below where you should have been. Now, will you recover it in the next 3 years? Unlikely, because the hit is very hard, and the required rate of growth for catching up is 11% per annum for next 3 years. And I think we believe that India at best can attain 7% per annum for next 3 years, which is a trend rate of growth. And if you do that, then you remain on a baseline which is parallel to the what would have been without the pandemic. So you basically suffer a 10% loss of GDP, which you are not able to bridge. And the last chart is showing you how you can catch up, but that is 11% GDP growth, which is unlikely, as I said. Next slide, please. Yeah, I think now what's happening is the official statistics are a little lacking right now. So the flavor of the season is the mobility indicators, whether it is from Google or, as Mr. Nath was pointing out the e-way bill collections, energy. There are various variables you can look at. But I think the Google mobility indicators are being tracked globally, and I think they have become a good proxy for economic activity. If you see the indicators, I think in the towards the end of March, we had a sudden steep fall in the economic in the mobility, which is a proxy for economic activity. Actually, mobility fell by something like 75 to 80%. All the indicators fell. And then I think after a month, we started relaxing it. And what we saw recover was grocery and pharmacy very, very fast. So things started improving and people started calling them green shoots. But I don't think these are green shoots, because we are still below the in terms of mobility, below the activity levels of pre-COVID, which was, I think, in the month of February and early March. And what has happened in July is that data is showing that, I think, is throwing cold water at whatever improvement was there, because the mobility is nudging down for for the reason that COVID-19 continues to spread very fast, and as a result, I think the lockdowns are again making a reappearance, and that is leading to some slowdown in the economic activity. So that's the situation where we stand. So that is same whether you look at the e-way bill correction or even if you look at the energy consumption. I think there is fading of initial gains that took place between May and June. So that's what the high frequency data is telling us. If we move to the next slide, please, which is my last slide. And this is here we look at what is the outlook for this year, what's going to drive it, and what are the risks. And then I think we look at what is the medium-term outlook for the economy. For the short term, I think what matters is three things. I mean, monsoons matter because agriculture this year is expected to do well, and I think agriculture depends on monsoons because large parts of agriculture are still unirrigated. What we had assumed was that the pandemic will peak out in the early part of July, September, and there is no second wave. Well, I think what has happened since we made the prediction is that the pandemic is not peaking out in the month of July, which is nearly over. It probably likely to peak out somewhere in August, September, which we don't know about. So this creates a downside risk to our -5%. I think we'll have to reassess, I think, as we get into August. And we have also assumed 1% of GDP additional fiscal stimulus, which has not come so far. So there is clearly a downside to -5% at this juncture. When we look at the next 5 years, I think we believe that the economy still has the ability, government will give the stimulus and has the ability to revert back to its trend rate of growth, and India will basically maintain its parity with the global growth, which has been the norm. India typically grows about 300 basis points faster than the global rate of global GDP growth rate, and this time our forecast suggests that it will grow at a little lower than that, which is 280 basis points. And I think having said that, I think some contours of recovery which we are learning from other economies are that manufacturing probably might be the first one to pick up. The services typically take a long time, and even in China, I think which is now a consumption economy, the firing consumption is not taking place, even though the economy is picking up. Clearly, government is thinking about pushing infrastructure investment up. So, and eventually they believe that will create the opportunities and consumption will pick up later on. So how it will play out in India, I think it's too early to say, but we still believe that consumption is in a somewhat better footing than investment in India at this juncture. So let me stop there. I've taken about 16 minutes, a minute more than what I was supposed to. So let me hand over the baton to
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Joshi. I'm sure our audience would post many questions to you based on these interesting insights. Let's welcome Mr. Rajesh Srinivas, Director, Customized Research, and Mr. Hemal N. Thakkar, the Associate Director at CRISIL Limited. Ajay has close to 20 years of experience in the field of research, financial analysis, and forecasting. He presently leads the customized research practice pertaining to the Indian automotive and banking and financial service sectors. He has worked closely with domestic and international clients in customized engagements related to market assessment, opportunity identification, competitive benchmarking, feasibility assessment, and due diligence. Hemal has over 14 years of experience in the automotive and logistics segment. He currently leads CRISIL's customized research for automotive and logistics practice, spreading across areas like demand forecasting, market opportunity assessment, competitive benchmarking, to name a few. Hemal also plays a critical role in CRISIL's franchisee initiatives, and in the past has worked on several marquee assignments for the automotive industry, like the Automotive Mission Plan 2026, a joint 10-year forward-looking policy document for the automotive industry that included industry bodies like SIAM, ACMA, CADA, and TMA. Over to you, Ajay and Hemal. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the kind and gentle introduction, Janvi. Yeah, so we'll be talking about the Indian automobile industry. We can move on to the next slide. Next, please. Yeah, So what we are trying to say is we'll first cover the commercial vehicle industry, where you've seen that there are various tonnage segments that are there in the commercial vehicle industry, and each of them are performing in a different manner. Each of them have a different contribution to the overall commercial vehicle industry, and the way in which they are driven are very different. The drivers for all of them are different. The challenges for all of them are different. Just to give you an insight, as Dr. DK Joshi referred in the earlier part of the presentation, that the economy is going through a very, very rough patch at this point of time. And commercial vehicle industry per se is one of the leading indicators of how the economy is performing. So clearly from that side, we are not seeing much light taking place at this point of time. There are hopes that the government will push infrastructure in the coming months, which will lead to some kind of revival in the industry, and the government think tank seems to be thinking in that lines at this point of time. So just to give you a sense, out of the total sales the industry achieved in fiscal 20, you see that almost 70% of the growth was contributed by vehicles which were less than 16 tons in terms of GVW. About 16%, about 20% sales was by the MHCV category, which is from 16 tons and above, which is largely the trucks which ply your goods across national highways, and 13% contribution was from buses, which is largely used for passenger movement. So these buses are all buses that are there in the country at this point of time, whether they may be buses by state transport undertaking, school buses that ferry a lot of children to school, and also a lot of aggregator segment like the likes of shuttle, city flow, etc., which have kind of come into existence over the last couple of years. Next. What we are trying to say is there are various segments that drive the commercial vehicle industry. One key segment is automotive segment, where there are vehicle carriers, auto components, and two-wheeler carriers. Now the reason to separate these three are two-wheeler carriers typically use vehicles which are in the MCV category, while the other auto carriers which carry passenger vehicles as well as tractors largely use your tractor trailers. So all of these are expected to be in deep negative, and if you actually see they are going to impact the sectors to which they kind of contribute very, very heavily. Next. Next, please. Yeah, the other is consumption products. You look at e-commerce, you look at FMCG, you look at consumer durables. As Dr. Joshi also mentioned, and as mentioned by Mr. Nath, the consumption driven segment is still doing relatively better, and hence you see that FMCG is expected to be largely flattish or marginally negative for that matter. E-commerce industry has picked up substantially because a lot of people are working from home and they are demanding things to be delivered at home. So in a way, it is turned out to be a positive for the e-commerce industry. However, one must note that this industry was growing at a very high pace of 25 to 30% CAGR over the last 5 years, and the current year growth is expected to be only in the range of about 0 to 2%. One key reason being that the entire April was largely under lockdown, where most of these e-commerce companies were not allowed to operate. Slowly, gradually, they started their operations from mid-May onwards, which means utilization started to improve after that because delivery was allowed across India. But before that, they were also constrained to delivering only essential items. However, their utilization levels have substantially improved, and there are chances that they may look at buying vehicles going forward, which will impact positively for the ICV and MCV space. Next. Next, when we look at construction, now this is one segment which can have some kind of impact or a positive impact on the industry. One key segment that drives construction activities is road construction, where we've seen that in the first quarter, despite lockdown, the execution was only 15% lower as compared to earlier. However, what will matter going forward is the pace at which funds are released to operators, whether it be HAM or EPC operators, to ensure that construction happens on time and the pace of construction goes on at the same pace. We have been doing construction at the rate of about 12 kilometers, 11 to 12 kilometers per day in 2018-19, which came down to a certain extent to around 10 to 11 kilometers in 2018 in 1920, and in the current fiscal we are expecting it to be in the range of 9 to 10 kilometers per day, which means there is some slowdown there. If that catches up to a certain extent, we are expecting some bit of positive momentum in tippers. Again, other segments like real estate have been very, very dismal and will continue to be so over the medium term. And irrigation, there are some projects which are largely announced in the southern part of the country, which are starting to come back on track, which is also a good signal that this category may catch up. Next. Similarly, mining and metals. So iron ore mining and coal mining to a certain extent have started to show some signs of revival, with iron ore exports picking up. And coal also, a lot of coal mines have come out with newer tenders, based on which we are actually seeing a lot of positive momentum in this space, but it is still expected to be negative for the entire year. Next. Yeah, other categories, are largely agri, POL, and cement. If you actually see, agri is one thing which is doing very, very well. We had a bumper Rabi harvest with normal rainfalls being there. We are expecting a good Kharif output also. The government has also increased their outlay on Manrega by about 40,000 crores, which means there is good money in the hands of rural folks. Under the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana, there are various initiatives that the government has taken, which has given free food delivery to people in rural places till November. There are money which has been put in Jandan accounts. There is some money which has been distributed for Divyang women, etc., which is actually leading to good cash flow in the hands of rural people. And hence, everywhere you would be not surprised hearing that the rural economy is picking up. The same is visible in tractor demand. The same is visible in some pickup in two-wheeler demand that is there at this current point of time. Next. Next. Yeah. So what we are actually seeing is, because of this, we are actually seeing that all the segments are actually not expected to do well. Buses, where there is major contribution for school and staff, because of schools not functioning at this point of time, and most of them being school from home, and staff also not going to offices because work from home is prominent in most of the places, except manufacturing activities which have started outside the prominent places in the city hub. So where there are buses required, tourism is very, very dismal and is not expected to pick up going forward. Hence, buses demand is also expected to slow down substantially in comparison to goods vehicles. All this put together, we are expecting a 30 to 32% decline in the commercial vehicle industry going forward for the fiscal 21. We move on to the next slide, please. Now, these are certain things which are pushing demand. What we've also seen is, if you look at the trajectory, there have been cases that demand and supply largely mirror each other. But what we've been actually seeing is, you look at the demand growth for 18 and 19, there was a substantial pickup in 19. But if you look at the capacity growth, you've seen that it peaked in FY18, it remained almost stable in 19 and 20, because it takes some time for the supply growth to kind of show some kind of momentum. Now, what is very important to notice, the industry went through a very, very different kind of regulation in 2018-19, where there was a lot of capacity that got added on its own because of independent axle load norms coming in. So there was an addition of about 15 to 20% of the capacity, because of which you can see the capacity bar is flat. Also, in the previous year, there were some efficiencies which got added because of GST coming in. So what has happened is, A, productivity of your vehicles has improved. B, there is additional carrying capacity that is available on the ground. And with demand growing at a very slackened pace, you are actually seeing capacity utilizations declining substantially. One more, next slide, please. If you actually look at the next chart, it will actually give you a view as to how the utilization levels have been dropping for transporters. It was at about 68% in its peak in fiscal 17, which dropped substantially to 57% in fiscal 20, and in 21 it is expected to be even lower. What is also very concerning is that if you look at the indexed gap between freight rate and diesel prices, so what we actually see is, this is a proxy for profitability. Now, that was at about 89% if we index fiscal 14 at 100, and that has actually moved to basically 111 in 17 when the capacity utilization levels were at peak. So the transporters were making good money. Currently, it is at 70 just before the end of this fiscal, or at the end of this fiscal, post which we have seen significant increase in terms of diesel prices. Capacity utilizations have substantially plummeted, which means the transporters' profitability is under tremendous pressure, and hence new buying is going to be very, very challenging going forward. Next, please. What we are also seeing is, non-performing assets have substantially inched up across categories. We have seen that there is a substantial inch up in non-performing assets at the end of Q4, and even the light commercial vehicle is showing signs of hardening by the end of Q4, which means financiers will also be cagey. And the same is also visible on the right hand side chart, where we are actually seeing that despite repo rates coming down, the spread between repo rates and the actual lending rates have not gone down substantially, which means there is a lot of risk awareness. As Mr. Nath said, banks are parking funds with RBI in the reverse repo bucket, where they are earning meager interest, but they are not in a position, or they are not wanting to basically lend to the community where there is high risk anticipated. And hence you see that CB rates have actually not come down and they are very firm. And for a segment where more than 95% of the asset category is funded, it is very, very difficult for the category to recover until and unless financiers lend a supporting hand. Next slide. Now we move on to the passenger vehicle industry. In the passenger vehicle industry, what we are seeing is, you will actually see that out of cars and utilities put together, cars control about 64% of the market, and the remaining 36% has been controlled by the utility vehicle segment. In the last 2 years or so, this segment has been under some kind of difficult, difficult trajectory for that matter. Even in fiscal 19, it barely grew by about 2.7%. In fiscal 20, we have seen a significant deceleration, and even in fiscal 21, we are expecting it to degrow substantially. Now, what is very important is, if you map those years with the GDP growth of India, you will actually see that 16, 17, 18, the GDP growth was still reasonable. But if you look at 19, the GDP growth actually slipped to 5%. In 20, the GDP growth slipped to 3%, which means there is a lot of pressure on incomes of people, which is actually reflecting in the buying behavior of cars. And in this year, we are expecting a negative GDP growth, which means going forward, we are actually expecting incomes to plummet substantially, and which will definitely impact the car buying behavior. Next. What we are also seeing is, there are a host of regulations which have come in the passenger vehicle industry. So was the case with commercial vehicles also. If you actually see, the entire automobile category has seen a host of regulations come in the last 3-4 years, which have not been seen in close to about a decade and a half. So a lot of regulations which came in, which increased prices of vehicles. So there were crash test norms, ABS norms, seat belts, compulsory insurance norms, where you needed to take own damage insurance and third party insurance for a particular period of time. All this led to an increase in cost of vehicles, and the acquisition cost went up. The acquisition cost typically, which goes up at a pace of 2 to 3% or 3 to 4%, depending on how the commodity cycle is, actually went up substantially in the range of about 15 to 20% across vehicle categories in the last 2.5-3 years, which has also put a lot of pressure on car buying. Next. Similarly, when we look at the total cost of ownership, now what is very interesting is, if you look at 18 and 19, despite acquisition costs going up, the total cost of ownership was largely muted. The reason being, fuel prices were under control. They were largely in the range of $40 to $50, and the tax on fuel prices are not very high. Hence, the running cost of vehicles was very low, and interest rates also were largely in check, because of which you see that the total cost of ownership was not very high. But you see, 20 onwards, the fuel prices started to inch up. Interest rates started to harden a little, because the economic situation was grim and the portfolio was actually showing some signs of stress. Because of which we are seeing the total cost of ownership inching up, closer to 20. And now in 21, we are expecting further firming up of certain costs, with petrol prices and diesel prices already going through the roof. And now interest rates are also not going to, they have undergone some kind of revision, but because of stress in portfolio, all that has got corrected in terms of repo rates will not be passed on. Next. What is also very important is, if you look at in the last few years, supply has something which has, kind of also driven demand. The total number of model launches that have happened in the last few years has been substantial. So if you look at something like utility vehicles, which has actually driven sales over the last couple of years. So the compact utility vehicle category has actually driven sales substantially. The number of models in compact utility vehicles were about 46, which have gone up to as high as 60. On the other hand, in the car space, it has largely been in the same band, which is also giving a sense the reason why this utility vehicles have been able to perform well, and there is a lot of traction in this space. Plus, the price positioning of these vehicles is very, very lucrative. It is largely very similar to the premium hatchbacks that you have, maybe a tad expensive, but it gives a better feel. The feel that the customer gets by buying a compact utility, and he feels pride owning it, and you've seen that reflecting in the buying behavior also. Next slide, please. Next, please. Yeah. Similarly, when you look at this, what we have seen is on the financing side, you would actually see that banks dominate the finance for passenger vehicles, unlike commercial vehicles where NBFCs are very very dominant, and they have been actually getting a little cagey, and you can actually see NBFC share growing slowly and gradually even in the passenger vehicle segment, because NBFCs are willing to take a little higher risk as compared to banks. On the other hand, what has also happened is disbursals have dropped sharply. One reason being that the industry itself has been under some kind of stress, and the second reason is that you are actually not seeing much volumes coming up, which has led to industries the disbursals dropping. Also, GNPA levels of passenger vehicles has been largely stable and has been in the green zone, which does not put much of a pressure. But there is one segment of cab aggregators which is actually facing a lot of problem because of plummeting utilization levels. So what financiers are doing at this point of time is they have reduced LTVs to take care of the balance portfolio, and hence the margin money that the customer has to pay because of increasing asset prices is become a little higher than what he used to do earlier. Now, what is that leading to is people refraining from buying vehicles at this point of time. Also, a lot of people have been advised to work from home for a larger part of the year till September or till December, which is also making them postponing their purchases at this point of time. Next slide. Yeah, we also tried to thought of bringing up a very interesting thing that we've done in the last few days, where if you actually see the top 20 districts of India used to contribute to about 20% of the sales, and we've tried to plot it for the next few districts, so on and so forth. If you actually see, the top 10 districts have lost about 2.5% share in the first quarter, and the 26 to 50 district also has lost around 1.7% share. Net if you see, about 4% share has got lost in the top 50 districts, and if you actually see, the remaining part of India has actually gained that 4% share, which is also giving you a sense that because of this persistent lockdowns, people not coming out, largely the top cities which are driving incomes of people which were largely demanding these passenger vehicles has been under stress, and they have actually refrained from buying. And it is the tier 2 tier 3 cities where things like agri has done really well, and where the impact of COVID has not been that substantial, which is now starting to catch up, has actually done well in those areas. And the bigger cities or the prominent cities have actually contributed lower to sales. Next slide, please. Yeah, next slide, please. We thought, we cannot have a session on automobiles without covering electric vehicles. So we just thought we'll give you a flavor of what we've done in the EV space. So as per our assessment, if you see, the battery prices are falling, but the pace at which, they will fall now will be fairly low, because we've actually seen a steep decline right from $1,000 per kilowatt hour to about $220 per kilowatt hour, which is we have seen in 2019. So the fall now will be very, very limited, and it will be more of productivity gains, where battery technology will keep getting better. So the same battery will actually give you more power as compared to before. We had done a small analysis, next please, where you'll actually see that what we had done is we had tried to get a sense of what is the incremental total cost of ownership for electric vehicles over combustion engine. So if you actually see, you can see in the chart that this is a price for 2020. So there, despite running the vehicle for 40,000 kilometers, you are still not able to catch up with combustion engine. So for such high driving also, it is not possible. So the personal vehicle segment cannot even think of buying an electric vehicle at this point of time, because the cost itself is so higher, despite the operating economics being much cheaper. Next. The other thing, if you actually see, if you look at the same scenario in 2025, what is encouraging is, if you are wanting to drive your vehicle for about 14,000 kilometers or more, you may actually start breaking even, and EVs may be a more attractive option as compared to combustion engine. Which means by 2025, we are expecting the personal vehicle segment to actually inch up and wanting to buy electric vehicles, and the cab aggregator segment can get into this space even earlier as compared to what we have seen today. Next. Also, what is very, very important is how the charging infrastructure is important. So if you look at from a passenger vehicle and commercial vehicle perspective, the dependence of buses as well as on, for cab aggregators, the charging infrastructure is very, very high, even for light commercial vehicles for that matter, because they will have to be charged as and when, their batteries get drained. But passenger vehicles for that matter can be charged, at your home or even at offices. So that is something that can provide respite to that category. But the other categories which are largely commercial in nature will require high intensity of charging infrastructure, where buses still being dominant largely by government state transport undertakings. We can still expect some support from STUs by them setting up their own charging facilities in STU stations. But for light commercial vehicles and cab aggregators, charging facility is something which will actually drive the future. We are seeing some signs of momentum there by IOC tying up currently with Sun Mobility to come up with swappable batteries. So yes, if going forward, if the government of India comes out with policies where they are having similar battery specifications for people or for public transport, there could definitely be a faster movement in this space. Next. Now, taking all this into consideration, if you actually see in the current context, we are not expecting a very high penetration of electric vehicles even by 2025. In the passenger vehicle space, we are expecting it to be about 4 to 5%. And if you look at the buses space, which will largely be driven by the government, it will be about 2 to 4%. And for light commercial vehicles, we are expecting it to be about 3 to 5%. I think, now I will hand over the session to my colleague Ajay Srinivasan, who will give you insights on the auto component industry and the dynamics that the current supply chain is into. Over to you, Ajay. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Hemal. So naturally, when the automobile industry is facing challenges because of COVID, the automotive component industry is also bound to feel the chills. And not surprisingly, we are seeing a severe slowdown in the auto component space as well. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, so this is our estimate of the overall auto component industry size in India. And naturally, I think it is driven a lot from the OEM side. On the OEM side, which constitutes 62% of the overall auto component industry, we expect a decline of about 16% in the revenues this year. And what would make it particularly tough for the industry is this comes on the back of a 17% decline in revenues in fiscal 20. Now there's a saying which says that tough times don't last, tough people do. So this, I would believe, is a golden opportunity for the auto component firms in India to try to see where are they in their journey in the current point of time. How do they really diversify and look at their business in the context of the upheavals which we are seeing both in the domestic market as well as in the global supply chains. And thereby, I think the export market definitely offers very good opportunities, particularly given the fact that in today's environment, I think most companies are looking at diversification of supply chain. They're looking at, okay, China is always there, but who is the second supplier after China? So China plus one is something which most OEMs are looking at. And given this context, I think it's if we are able to up the game, it's a very golden opportunity for Indian companies to really up the game as far as the exports are concerned. Exports have not been doing very well for the last couple of years. In fiscal 20, they in fact declined by 6%, and fiscal 21 we expect a further drop given what we are seeing in the automobile industry globally. But having said that, I think as and when the global recovery happens, if we're able to get our act together, it's a very golden chance for, I would say, the auto component supplies in India to up the game. Yes, I think there are question marks around scale, around cost competitiveness, around technology. But surely, I think given that there is a lot of government focus also now in terms of developing self-sufficient components, it may be a really good time to really step back and see what we need to do. As far as the replacement market is concerned, I think we are expecting a decline, and this is possibly for the first time, I think, in the last decade at least, we are seeing a decline in the replacement demand in India with the running of the vehicles actually going down quite substantially because of the lockdowns which we are seeing in many parts of the country. Our sense is that the replacement demand would be much lower this year because the vehicles will not run as much as they used to run earlier. Secondly, we are also seeing a trend where consumers are actually preferring to what we call as downtrade, preferring cheaper alternatives rather than looking at costlier options. at a time when they are facing a lot of economic hardship. So therefore, our sense is replacement market will decline by 13%. I think here again, I think we will see a difference in performance of smaller markets and the bigger cities. I think bigger cities, it may be a little bit more sharper compared to the smaller markets. Can we go next slide? I think when first the pandemic struck us, I think the question was that how are we going to really manage the supply shock? And I think the supply shock was abating, and supply shocks come from factory shutdowns, labor shortages, disruptions in the supply chain, cash flows actually being an issue because of which certain suppliers are not able to supply. But I think what we are now seeing is that because of the persistent and localized lockdowns, this is becoming a very big source of worry for the industry. I think most players have to look at it in two ways. Either they have sufficient inventory with them to be able to manage any unforeseen contingencies from the supply chain perspective, or they have to have diversification in terms of the supply base. In the last 1 month itself, we have seen large parts of the country, Bengaluru, Pune, as well as Aurangabad, which are very, very large suppliers of auto components. Lockdowns have happened in a localized manner because of which the supply chain has been disrupted. For example, there was non-availability of fuel injection systems for quite a bit of time because of large parts of Bangalore actually being under shutdown. Similarly, a lot of the units in Pune and Aurangabad on the engineering side, because of them actually being shut down, we saw a lack of demand or the supply chain as far as the some of the components were actually disrupted. So clearly, I think we are looking at a situation wherein most OEMs are going to relook at the way they organize their supply chains. They are going to relook at more diversification of supply base, as well as look at how do they really insulate themselves against these kind of unforeseen contingencies. But I think what could persist more is the demand shock. Our sense is that maybe 2 or 3 months from now, I think the supply shocks will slowly start abating, because I think manufacturers will also start looking at alternative modes. The bigger shock would come from the demand side. Clearly, we are seeing a very, very sharp decline or sharp pressure on demand because of the fact that there is a massive slowdown in the economy. This is the first time I think it has been led by manufacturing and services rather than agriculture. And because of this, I think the appetite of consumers to spend on discretionary products will be little limited. And therefore, as an industry, one needs to really look at how to really work along with the ecosystem, work along with the financiers to be able to see as to how to really rev up the demand. So the demand shock is possibly going to persist a lot more, and therefore we are extremely circumspect about automobile demand this year. Come fiscal 22, our senses things should pick up. I think the structural factors which drive India as a country remain intact. But like DK mentioned, I think in this presentation, Mr. Joshi mentioned, we are looking at a 10% permanent loss of GDP because of COVID. And so in a way, we can say that COVID has possibly set us back by 1 or 2 years. In terms of the various segments, I think auto component manufacturers catering to both three-wheelers as well as the commercial vehicle space will be impacted much more. I think the other segments, I think it's a little bit muted, and tractors, in fact, we are positive because tractors, we are likely to be positive growth this year. Can you go next slide? So we spoke a lot about, you can click next also. We spoke a lot about the opportunity on the export side. So in this graph, what we have tried to do is look at the geographical mix of exports from India, and India exports quite a bit of components even today, roughly about 12.5 billion euros. And here we have looked at the segments to which the exports go. So clearly, I think India can actually make a mark in exports. I think we compete with China, South Korea, Japan, and other ASEAN countries who largely export to US and Europe. Here I would say that if we are able to put our minds to it and look at which are the components when India can really make a difference, and if you look at it, I think large parts of engine components, to some extent the suspension and braking and drive transmission and steering systems is where I think India has been exporting in the past as well. So if you're able to get our acts together, and also look at something, say for example FTA, much more seriously, I think that this can really make a difference. Along with obviously looking at the constraints on the infrastructure side, on the power side, which have historically kind of been the bane of Indian manufacturing. But focused approach will definitely be the key to boosting exports. The fact that the world is looking at alternatives beyond China is in fact a opportunity for a country like India. Like Mr. Joshi mentioned, we are seeing the government actually embark on some reforms which can be truly transformational in nature. On the agriculture side, reforms have been announced. Yesterday, we saw landmark education policy changes being announced, and it would lead to a complete overhaul of the education system in India when it gets implemented. So there are a lot of these reforms also which are being initiated by the government, but obviously the results of all these reforms will take some time to really bear fruit. Can you move to next slide? So how will the industry's thinking shape after the pandemic, right? Clearly, we are looking at various considerations here. Say for auto component suppliers as well as OEMs, I think the availability of components and time, the labor availability, these have become key issues. Clearly, I think we are going to see more and more emphasis on automation, given the fact that we have seen that how fickle labor can be when a situation such as a pandemic arises. And it also, purely from an efficiency perspective, the possibility is that the automation quotient for most OEMs as well as component suppliers will have to increase. Also, from a logistics perspective, doesn't mean more opportunities for 3PL, doesn't mean the depth of just-in-time management, which has been the hallmark of automotive industry in India. I think some of these questions we will start getting answers to as and when the situation settles down. But clearly, I think in today's market, it doesn't look like JIT is something which people can work with because of the fact that the supply situation itself is very, very dynamic. From a dealer perspective, I think with dealerships in many parts still not being fully operational, I would say, weekend lockdowns and those kind of things being announced, which are more localized in nature, implementation of social distancing norms, we are seeing a complete overhaul of the complete customer experience or customer management journey, right? And we are seeing that most OEMs are spending a lot of time in trying to digitize the touch points which they have with the customers. So today, I would say with the exception of the final delivery of the vehicle and maybe the test drive to some extent, most of the points are being digitized. And in a way, I would say that the entire process is being made far more smooth and frictionless from a customer perspective. And also from an OEM perspective, it could lead to really widening the target market if I take a more long-term view, because you may be able to reach out to customers which you would have found it very difficult and expensive to earlier. So from an industry perspective, this is definitely going to make it more efficient. Obviously, one will need to keep in mind the interest of dealers as well, because they are also important stakeholders as far as the automotive landscape is concerned. So with this, I would like to end my presentation. We would like to take on board any questions from the audience, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Joshi. Thank you, Hemal and Ajay. Thank you for the excellent presentation. In fact, quite a few questions have come up. So we will be just taking up the questions also. Let me start with Dr. Joshi first. So Dr. Joshi, we are talking about the agriculture, that the agriculture is like a silver lining in the whole economy at present. But Dr. Joshi, agriculture constitutes only about 15 to 16% of our GDP. So even if the agriculture does well by a few percentage points, can it really carry the weight of the whole economy on its shoulder, or to what extent can it cushion the fall of the GDP fall, Dr. Joshi?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, agriculture is about 15% of GDP, so it doesn't have the muscle power to offset the non-agriculture, which is sinking very, very deeply. But having said that, I think agriculture still supports about 40% of the workforce. So I think it has the dependence of people is disproportionately higher than its contribution to GDP. So I think from that perspective, it's very critical. This is a pandemic where I think your diet is an important part of facing the pandemic. I think good food production, good agriculture production would mean that we have ample food supplies, which can be so there are many, looking beyond the GDP, there are many welfare aspects of agriculture which we need to focus on. And I think the third thing I would like to say is that, well, the rural economy is half of total economy in India, and agriculture is 1/3 of that. But I think the support that the government is giving in terms of its employment generation or support to the farmers through its direct benefit transfer called PM Kisan, I think all those are going towards rural areas. I think there's very little, so to say, for urban poor and urban unemployed in that sense. So rural part of the economy is somewhat better placed, although I think some risks are emerging there because COVID-19 is now moving towards the rural side. And I think it's less susceptible because it's sparsely populated. So I think the spread of the virus is not going to be a major issue. I think overall, this is the context. I mean, in this context, agriculture plays an important role during the time when things are not doing well.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Joshi. Dr. Joshi, also, how do you foresee the movement of rupee vis-a-vis the dollar in the next 3 to 6 months? We've seen rupee has depreciated against the dollar, and how do you foresee the movement now for the next 3 to 6 months, Dr. Joshi?
Well, I think we faced three hits to the currency in the last 10 years. The first one was global financial crisis when the currency went down very sharply. Second was taper tantrum somewhere in 2013 when again rupee depreciated very fast. This time around the crisis is the biggest, but rupee has been reasonably stable, I would say. I think the depreciation rate is not that much, and I think it's hovering in a range bound manner. And I think a couple of reasons for that. One, I think unlike the previous crisis or hits to the currency, India is not running a current account deficit, which is large. Actually, it's moving towards a surplus situation. So your requirement of forex is less. Second, I think the capital flows have. We had outflows. Now I think we have net inflows. So I think that also creates. So from a balance of payment side, I think you have adequate currency. Rupee, my sense is, if RBI had not intervened, rupee would have appreciated actually. So I mean, if scenario continues and there is no run on the currency because of a second wave, etc., I would see the rupee very stable. I mean, that's what we are also predicting. Unless I think there is very adverse news on the COVID-19 and the economy front, and which I think so far has not played out. So I think rupee, I would see more stability in the rupee, and forex reserves are also pretty. Pretty
quite good at the present. Yes, that's right. Thank you. Dr. Joshi, in one of your slides, you had mentioned about this 10% loss of GDP, and you had mentioned that we need 11% GDP growth for next 3 years to catch up on this deficit. Now, 11% growth is hardly unfeasible, I would say, in the next. So actually, when will this catch up happen? Because if we leave out this factor of 11% for 3 years, considering a realistic growth, what we can look at, how long will it take the GDP loss due to COVID to be caught up?
Well, I don't see it catching up in next 5 years for sure. Beyond that,
okay. That's a short and crisp answer, Dr. Joshi.
Well, I mean, that's all I can say at this juncture.
Right. I'll come back to you, Dr. Joshi. There are still a few more questions, but let me first come to Hemal and Ajay. Hemal, question for you is actually after the lockdown, especially in China, there was a huge surge in automotive sales. It was like a pent-up demand that came out. However, in Indian scenario, this is hardly visible. We are not seeing any surge happening, although lockdown to some extent has been lifted now. Do we at all see the pent-up demand? Normally, if we go by history, the festive seasons are generally a very good period for automotive sales. So can the automotive branch draw some inspiration from history during the festive season?
So there are two things, which will define this. One, as you rightly said, China, we also need to be aware of the fact that, the per capita income or the per capita purchasing power parity of China is about $7,000 to $8,000 as compared to 2,000, which is for India. So their purchasing power is far better, their incomes are far better as compared to us. They came out of this pandemic much faster than, what we are into at this point of time, because at what stage is India at current point of time, nobody is in a position to predict. And as you know, Dr. Joshi also mentioned, or as mentioned by Ajay also earlier, it depends on how this will subside. So if this subsides largely by end of August or end of September, even for that matter, we could still expect a good festive season going forward, because this time the festive is there in two phases. You have Dashara in October and then followed by Diwali, which is in November. So you will still have some time, so you will see some kind of positivity, momentum picking up, etc. Also, what is encouraging also, just before entering into this webinar, we have seen in the morning today that Delhi government has reduced VAT on, kind of fuel, which has led to a reduction in prices by about 8 to 9 rupees. So such steps, will definitely see that, during festive momentum, if things are fine from a COVID perspective, we could actually see things catching up and we could see a better festive. But even then, if you ask me, we'll be probably almost equivalent to last year in that sense, or marginally lower. There are two things that we need to understand, that last year also we were on an abnormally low base because of BS6 coming in and the economy going through a down cycle. So from that perspective, as Dr. Joshi said, it may not be a so-called real recovery, but the low base will actually help us coming back to a positive trajectory once we approach closer to Q4.
Also, Hemal, in your presentation, you mentioned that export could be a sort of savior for the auto industry, auto component industry, since our export percentage is low. Now, what is actually holding back exports from India in the auto component sector? Because we have the potential, I think we have a lot of auto component suppliers, but still, why are we not able to target a higher share of export?
Ajay, you would like to take that?
Yeah, so I think I would attribute that to two or three reasons. One is that I think the orientation of most auto component suppliers in India is not geared towards being a player in the global marketplace. So they are happy in their own cocoons. So that is something which possibly needs to change, and I think that may actually, this kind of a pandemic could trigger a change in thought process, especially if they all of times to what we are seeing today in this political situation. I think most people will be aware that both US and China and India and China are going through their fair share of tensions. And the fact that the world is looking at alternatives to China would actually maybe help shape the thinking. So that is first factor. Second is, I think we lack scale. I think China is like multiple times of India in terms of scale, and I think we need to have larger suppliers. We need to have more global scale capacities. And thirdly, I would say that from a cost competitiveness perspective, I think scale will give you part of the cost competitiveness. I think the other part comes from both infrastructure and logistics. So that also, I think India is far behind compared to other markets. So I think if the government focuses on some of these areas, this will help not only auto components, many other export-oriented sectors.
Right. Then a question has come as when will the passenger vehicle and commercial vehicle market? Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, so Mr. Nath, one more thing
Anybody
that I would
adding?
like to highlight there, as Ajay mentioned, is that most of the countries that are currently exporting higher, so maybe the likes of China or
Yeah.
South Korea, etc., have a lot of free trade agreements with most of the nations across the globe. So despite they being a little more on the expensive side and maybe technology much more competent as compared to others, those free trade agreements are actually helping them penetrate deeper into those markets, and that is what they have got as an advantage over a period of time.
Okay. Maybe for Hemal and Ajay, yes, Hemal, we've lost you. Yeah. Maybe in the meantime, I can. Yeah. Maybe Ajay, I'll put the question to you in the meantime. Is that by when is it expected? For example, the commercial vehicle market has dipped considerably in 2000. I think 2019-20 was also quite a difficult year for the commercial vehicle industry. And as we saw from the presentation today, also 2021 is going to be difficult. So when can the commercial vehicle industry as well as the passenger vehicle industry reach the 2018 level? How long will it take approximately?
Yeah, I think you will start seeing some signs of pickup. I think provided the pandemic subsides in terms of the growth trajectory itself from Q4 of this fiscal itself. And obviously the base is much beaten down. But you will start seeing some improvement. I think one of the things which is making the current situation more challenging also, mainly from the commercial vehicle side, is that because of BS6, the prices of heavy trucks have increased quite substantially. And today, the fact of the matter is most financiers are quite wary of taking an exposure of 35 lakh or 40 lakh towards a single truck from a transporter, given the pressure we are seeing in terms of freight. So as the situation improves in terms of both traffic growth and also in terms of the pandemic situation, we should see some revival. But to touch the 2018 levels, I think it's tough to say, but I think it looks like it will take maybe 2 years more to go back to those levels.
Okay. I would still feel that is optimistic, Ajay.
Yeah. Yeah, so absolutely, I think it's a minimum of 2 years. I think provided everything subsides and we are back to the growth trajectory in 2022.
Coming to the e-mobility factor, Ajay, now when we are talking about e-mobility or India increase of the penetration of e-vehicles, now especially for auto component exports, then there would be the engine components would be missing as we penetrate more and more into e-vehicles. So would this would also impact the exports then of auto components, Ajay, or how do you see this could be compensated?
I think clearly, I think while we are looking at the e-mobility part kind of hitting to the engine demand, components demand, like you rightly mentioned, I think this is more of a long-term phenomena. I think in segments like passenger vehicles, even commercial vehicles to a large extent, we don't see actually the e-vehicles actually making a very significant dent, at least for the next 5 years. I think as and when that comes, I think we have to get more focus on the electrical components and those kind of parts as well. If I'm taking even a 4 to 5 year view, my sense is there is no immediate threat because we are still a very, very small part of the global landscape.
Dr. Joshi, let me come to you with a few questions more that have come. Now, Dr. Joshi, you also spoke about the stimulus package. Now, the stimulus package, would it really help in the recovery of the Indian economy? Because considering, as you mentioned, that the fiscal stimulus is quite weak. So is it really going to, because what we require at this moment is a short-term boost which can push the economy. You mentioned about that the fiscal would help, the stimulus package would help in a long-term recovery. So what really needs to be done for a short-term recovery?
Well, I think fiscal stimulus will help both in preserving the short run and the long run. But if you look at the, I think just to put the Indian policy in context, what the government is thinking. It has two objectives. One is, I think, to act as a bridge between the crisis and the recovery phase, to ensure that businesses are supported and also to ensure that households whose incomes have been impaired, I think, are provided some support. So that is carrying you to the recovery phase. And second is, when the recovery phase starts, even then you will need to support the economy through a lot of demand boosting measures. Now, government seems to be saying we will be focused more on the latter part, which is when the things become okay, we'll support the economy. So the worry there is that if you don't support during the current phase through more fiscal spending, I think many of these entities may reach the recovery phase in a shape that they can participate in recovery, which essentially means that companies could go down, particularly the small and medium enterprises, or the households could be completely in bad shape. So I think that part, saving the I think, is where you need to put money. Put in money, and there fiscal stimulus will play a much larger role than what monetary policy will play. Just giving, nobody is willing to. Neither banks are willing to lend. They want money for. So the point is that you need somebody to physically to provide support. Government has done a few good things. They're providing food grain support so that there's no stress on that side. They're also putting money in the hands of people, but I think there's much more. In terms of quantum, it is insufficient. That's the point and it is insufficient to act as a bridge to the recovery phase. So you will see a lot of distress, I think, if you don't do that, permanent distress.
And Dr. Joshi, do you think, because there is a hope or aspiration that another stimulus package may come out before the end of the year, do you see such a possibility happening?
I think so. I think government will have to increase its fiscal spending. I think because for two reasons. One, I think the pandemic has gone beyond what was initially expected. So that, and you have to reimpose lockdown. So you need more support from the policy side. And second, I think there is distress building up in urban areas also, for which I think they will have to provide some sort of support. It's not rural alone. The urban part is also large, and particularly the small businesses and businesses like restaurants and stuff like that, where I think where people cannot survive beyond 1 to 2 months. Without support.
Right. Dr. Joshi, perhaps the next question for you is that India was aspiring, our call of the Prime Minister was that we wanted to reach the $5 trillion economy by 2025. Now with the pandemic, how far will it push us from 2025? How far will this ambitious target be pushed back?
Maybe I think 2 years, at least 2 years, because you've lost 10% of GDP and you're not recovering it. So which essentially means 10% of GDP is a 2-year GDP, assuming that 5 to 6% growth will take place. So I think a back of the envelope calculation tells me at least it's going to be 2 years beyond what was envisaged.
Right. And my last question to you, Dr. Joshi, is a very interesting question. I don't know how far it is pertinent. As our world has witnessed various crises in the last 100 years, both health and economic, is there any method that the economists can, or any model that economists can predict, emulating the data from the past, regarding a possible time-bound recovery of the economy in a particular way?
I don't think so. I think not in this crisis, because it is, economists typically are not used to analyzing the sudden stop. Economies slow down slowly, they go into recession and then come out of recession. It's usually a 2 to 3 year phase. Here you had a vertical drop, and how you will come out of a vertical drop, I think, particularly when the risk is not so much from the economic activity per se, it is coming from the health side, and which is quite unpredictable. So this is a non-linear development, and I think even people with a very high IQ cannot understand non-linear developments. It's proven. So in this case, I would say I don't think any model will work. And you look at how the forecasts have changed in the last 3 months. I think people have swung from plus 5% to to -5 or even -8, 9 in just a matter of 3 months. So that's telling you, as and when more information will become available, you'll start factoring that in. And I think you'll have to depend less on the traditional sources of data and more on non-traditional sources like Google Mobility or transaction data to assess what's going on and which parts of the economy are getting impacted. And that is, I think, is the new trend now. I think, which is, I don't think past state.
No, I think we've lost. I think we've lost Dr. Joshi. Yeah. Okay.
Hello.
Yeah. Can you hear us, Dr. Joshi? Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes. Okay. Fine. So thank you for these inputs, Dr. Joshi. Let me, maybe the last few questions, let me direct to Ajay and Hemal. I had one query also. I don't know, Hemal or Ajay, who would like to take it up. So our automobile industry or the automobile industry is quite dependent on China for the imports also. We say almost 28%, 26 or 28% imports come from China. Now, with COVID coming in, we've seen this global supply chain has got disrupted. Do you think the local industry has the capability and capacity to deck this gap? And do you see that this imports would in the next period be covered by the domestic production? Do you at all foresee such a possibility? I don't know, Hemal or Ajay, would like to
look at this like say a 4 to 5 year journey, then possibly it can be done. But overnight, it's not possible to really shift suppliers. And I think because automobile products today go through a lot of precision testing, etc., because of which you will not be able to shift overnight. The second most important reason is as far as both quality is concerned and cost is concerned. I think we will not be able to really bridge the gap in such a short time period. But today, with the world becoming a marketplace, I think the technical know, etc., everything is available. It's more about whether you're able to achieve the scale and manage the quality as well as the cost.
Okay. Would you like to add something, Hemal?
No. I think that is well covered. What has happened is because of BS6 coming in at such a short space of time.
Right.
So what has happened is because of which Indian industry has been in a way looking at alternatives, and they found China to fit in, which was more cheaper and largely aligned to what they were looking at, in turning it around at a very quick pace, because we've seen BS4 to BS6 jump happening in just 2 years. So to do a lot of electronification to test those kind of devices, as Ajay mentioned, takes a lot of time, and it is not very easy. So it is better to try something which is tried and tested and available at a very relatively kind of stable price, rather than looking at something which is at an exorbitant cost. So from that perspective, that decision was taken. With respect to localization, yes, the critical components may take some time, as Ajay is saying, maybe 4 to 5 years, but there may be some low hanging fruits which we'll be able to localize very quickly, maybe in the next 2 years or so. And there are a lot of efforts being made in that direction, based on my interactions on the ground with a lot of auto component as well as automobile companies. So there is a genuine effort that is happening on the ground with respect to this, and we are sure this will bear fruit in the near term for at least non-critical components.
Coming to e-mobility, Ajay, now as maybe 3-4 years down the line, as we have more penetration of e-vehicles in the Indian auto market, now actually at the moment we are quite dependent on China, especially when we talk about e-mobility. Now, would the dependence on China actually increase as we have more e-vehicles coming into the market? And what should India do to counter this? Do you foresee that, or from your experience, are you seeing that companies are already working towards this in India? You gave 1 or 2 examples, but would our dependency on China actually increase in 4 or 5 years?
So, Ajay, you would like to take it, or I'll take it?
You can answer this, no problem.
Yeah, so there, if you ask me, yes, if you see the electric vehicle industry in India today is largely dominated by e-rickshaws, and a few unorganized two-wheelers, where a lot of things are being imported from China, assembled here, and then they are sold. But there are also very good companies, which are upcoming in the e-three-wheeler as well as in the e-two-wheeler space. So you look at the likes of Ather, Okinawa, even Hero Electric now, even if you look at the other players in the three-wheeler space, like Mahindra is coming out with its own e-auto. So these players are actually looking at technology in a much different manner as compared to only procuring from China. They are working a lot in developing a lot of these products here. A lot of them have already localized electric motors and a few traction controller motors over a period of time. The government of India has given out a plan in terms of phased manufacturing plan, which gives proper deadlines with respect to by when what could be localized in order to avail subsidies. Yes, higher kilowatt hour motors are going to be a little difficult to indigenize in a short frame, but you are also seeing global players like Hyundai, Volkswagen, Toyota, etc., making a lot of effort in that space. Maruti, along with Toyota and Panasonic, have set up a battery plant in Gujarat. So, there are a lot of things happening, though in a very dispersed manner at this point of time. But I'm sure, going forward in the next 3 to 4 years, we will actually see some light playing in. One thing that we need to be very, very careful about is that today, at the end of the day, for any electric vehicle that is made and which is lithium ion based, there are three basic materials: nickel, magnesium, and cobalt, NMC, which you typically call it as. Now, China has basically hold of most of the global reserves with respect to these commodities, or most of the mines are largely administered by China, more than 60% of the capacity. Lot of Indian PSUs have been given a free hand to acquire mines globally to make us self-sufficient. There are some steps, which are going on in this direction. So I'm sure, with the wherewithal coming from the government side, if this happens in the right direction, we should actually start seeing ourselves self-sufficient, a couple of years down the line.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Emil. Actually, there are a few more questions that are there, but I think we will have to take those offline now. We'll send you we'll sort out certain questions and we'll send it to you later on. So let me conclude. I would like to thank Dr. Joshi and his colleagues Ajay and Hemal for the excellent presentation and giving us a very good overview on the economy, the way forward for the economy and the automotive sector and e-mobility sector in India. I would also like to thank all our members and industry friends who have joined this webinar in large numbers. I would also like to thank my colleagues for organizing it so efficiently. The difficult to explain point about India is that the underlying need to grow is so strong that COVID or no COVID, this energy cannot be bottled up forever. The average Indian needs to earn and spend, and it is partly the reason why COVID infections are spreading in India. So both state and citizen have to learn to live with COVID until a cure is possible. Growth cannot be held back anymore. Hence, though we are all battling the stormy waters of COVID, but with resilience, with foresight and optimism, let us try to sail our boats to economic safety. Friends, stay safe, stay healthy, and thank you very much for joining us for this webinar. And thank you, Crystal, for partnering with us. And Dr. Joshi, thank you for being with us along with Ajay and Hemal. Thank you. Have a nice evening.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks, all.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.